Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. Hope you're all comfortable. My name is Bev White. I'm the Group CEO of a company called Nash Squared, and the brands Harvey Nash and Nash Tech are part of our organisation. As a CEO in a business that is very technology related, I consider myself to be someone who needs to think big. But actually, in the company that I find myself in today, I'm not quite sure I understood the word think big until I spoke to some of our colleagues here from NASA today. They really do think big. And as we step forward into an age where technology becomes ever more integrated into our lives, into society, and AI plays an increasingly important part in all of our lives, thinking big is going to become ever more important in everything we do. How an organization can harness AI for good, for its advantage, is really important, and how it will affect our jobs, of course, is on the lips of many people around the world. And of course, what are the ethical concerns about technology making decisions that humans used to make? And in fact, are probably making as I speak. Harvey Nash and Nash Tech feel that the big impact and opportunity of AI, perhaps more than most in the work that we do, our technology recruitment business, Harvey Nash, has placed many technology experts into clients to help them develop their AI systems and to transform their businesses and the work that they then in turn deliver for their clients. We really are helping organizations change the world. And I personally got into the job I do because of doing just that, really having that opportunity. I think how we source and how we select candidates and how we use AI to help us do that has to be ever on our mind, making sure that we are adopting ethical practices, really important. Big things for a CEO and people like me to get our heads around. And while thinking big is important, we also mustn't lose sight of the here and now, being in the present. From our own digital leadership research and soon to be launched Tech Talent Survey and Salary Report, which we're really proud to partner with LinkedIn, who are in the audience today, so thank you. You'll see on your handout a little bit more information around that survey. The reality is that more than half of organizations are really struggling today to find a clear business case for AI. And whilst many are using it for personal productivity, which of course is really important in itself, there are fewer that are actually using it in anger. But the adoption of AI will change and is changing at pace, and by working closely together through partnerships such as this and others, understanding what big and small steps we need to take in AI will become very clear, and very important decisions for all of us who work in businesses and around the world need to make in these coming years. It's the reason we created the documentary that we're about to share with you, and we're extremely excited and very proud to be doing this. I hope you enjoy this event. Please do take the opportunity to speak to people around you. I think you probably will be surprised just who we have here today and the quality of the thinking that we all of us bring to this debate. I think what I would really now like to do is hand over to David Savage, our technology evangelist and the producer of our documentary, formally to introduce it to us. Thank you.
I promise to be brief, and I think it's probably stating too much to say that I'm the producer, because the support of the business that I work for is really the producer behind this. I just get to stand in front of the camera and have a good time. I want to thank Bev for those kind words and introduction. I've been running Tech Talks, our technology podcast, now for 9, nearly 10 years, and the ambition with that podcast has always been to storytell and to connect to people. I think in our industry right now, that's really quite important given the challenges that we face. The idea behind the film was to give us a slightly bigger canvas to play with and to explore the topics that we felt really did need talking about. And AI is absolutely something that we need to talk about. As Bev said, it will change the way that we work. But fear of missing out, misplaced enthusiasm, they're really dangerous. And making sure that organizations take the right path or that they're supported by governments in the right way is really important. I can't promise answers to the questions that we're facing as an industry, but I hope that the film sparks conversation and debate. I've discovered that making documentaries is quite ambitious. I do genuinely want to thank everyone involved, particularly my colleagues at Harvey Nash and Nash Tech, for their support, but also to someone who's in the middle of the room, to Steve McLaren, the Chief Operating Officer at the National Robotarium in Scotland, who let us run amok for 2 days in his facility. As you're about to see, they gave us a lot of space to create this film. However, knowing where to focus the camera or your lens is not always necessarily easy, and I'm sure that Dr. Omar and his panel will bring some of those conversations to life in a very meaningful way. When Dr. Crystal Johnson suggested that she was able to help facilitate this event and put the screening together, it was too good an opportunity to miss. But it was also interesting to hear that an organization like NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center needs to engage with industry. It really does highlight the seriousness of the complexity of the challenges that we're facing. So look, I hope you enjoy the film, and I hope that you enjoy the conversation that follows after, and thanks for coming out this afternoon.
It took the world by storm, and we kind of needed to catch up. For the first time, the kind of technology that the general population had only seen in sci-fi movies was now in their fingertips.
I am a science fiction nerd. I've always been fascinated by stories involving robots and AI. And whether or not you open a book or you take a trip along to the cinema to watch the latest blockbuster, you're often presented with a cautionary tale of machines turning on their creators. Why we cast AI as that rebellious menace rather than a faithful servant isn't the subject of this documentary. But we do need to explore how that relationship's evolving, because whatever you think of these tools, they're everywhere, from helping us answer telephone calls through to diagnosing cancer. We're reaching a tipping point. At this year's CES, Samsung confidently talked about AI for all across their products. In fact, it's probably harder now to find a technology business who isn't promising to change the way that you either work or live through the use of AI. But what about global organizations and their workforce? The changes that we're going through are as significant as the Industrial Revolution. And whilst we're right to be wary about the challenges posed by AI, what about the challenges posed by humanity to artificial intelligence and automation? Well, what better place than the National Robotarium to come and get the answers to some of those questions? Established jointly by Heriot-Watt University and the University of Edinburgh, the National Robotarium is a world-leading centre for robotics and artificial intelligence, creating innovative solutions to global challenges. So this might be a really daft question given that we're at the National Robotarium, but what do we actually mean by robots?
So to me, a robot is a machine that can interact with the world. Mm-hmm. And by interaction, I mean either physical or language interaction, but mostly physical. So a lot of AI systems will not have a direct interaction with the world. Robots, like this one, will directly in contact with the world and change the world.
Yeah.
So that's to me the definition of a robot. You can change the world around you.
The National Robotarium isn't just a research facility, but it also provides invaluable support to entrepreneurs and startups striving to make a difference. Now, you moved in here beginning of 2022.
Yes.
The National Robotarium, I think, officially opened in the autumn of 2022.
Yeah.
What do you think a centre like this provides for a business to enable it to flourish?
This is like a real hub for us. It's a hub where we can engage with people within the industry, you know, not even just within the robotics healthcare industry. You know, robotics span across loads of different types of industries that the Robotarium engage with here. So there's never a challenge that hasn't probably already been encountered by the people within this space. So the people's one thing, but then the equipment, the facilities, you know, we have lab space here. We develop all of our soft robots from the Robotarium. And yeah, so the tech and equipment, the facilities have just been absolutely instrumental in helping us progress our product development to where it is now today.
Ivan, in your capacity here at the National Robotarium, you are trying to take theory into practice with industry.
Mm-hmm.
So when industry come in and talk to you in that first instance, do they understand the depth or the detail of knowledge that they're going to have to implement?
No, in general they don't. Very few companies have the expertise in robotics to implement or understand the solutions that we want to implement. So there's a lot of work to do to get them to understand what's possible, what's not possible, the timescales that will be needed to implement the solutions. And more importantly, I think, gives them a dose of reality check on what robotics is capable of. Because there is a lot of misconception through recent movies and recent press that robotics can do anything and everything.
So they think it can do more than it necessarily can?
In general, they do.
What do you think industry could do to try and help educate the workforce and prepare them for whatever changes we might be seeing?
So I think industry at top level needs to understand a bit more the technology. So there's an awareness at CEO level. What is AI? What is robotics? What are the main trends? What is it capable of now, in 5 years, in 10 years? So they can map that in their mind and what that will do for their company. But I think it comes from the top. CEO needs to understand what it can be done. They need to have a plan, and then bottom up, you can then feed in the right technologies and the right understanding at the workforce level.
Our digital leadership report says that 15% of leaders don't feel prepared for the challenges that they're facing. And throughout 2023, there was a rising sense of panic across the industry. To find out how enterprise organizations are trying to answer these questions, I decided to go talk to US-based organization Slalom. Hiya!
Hey!
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
So how are organizations actually using AI, or how are they hoping to use AI if they're coming up to moving from proof of concepts to large-scale implementations?
So in the research that we did in 2023, it showed that 84% of organizations were using AI in some shape or form. And we're seeing majority of organizations doing and experimenting in using AI to drive productivity. So whether that's using it to make knowledge management quicker and easier, and ensuring that the people that were working there can do their jobs quicker and faster and be able to focus on more value-added tasks. And then we also saw quite an advent of using artificial intelligence in customer service to differentiate their products and services over competitors by using things like virtual assistants or chatbots in the sales and marketing space. So that's where I would say predominantly the focus has been. Majority of organizations are still at that POC stage, right? So we are really just coming to the cusp of really heightening that implementation and scaling of artificial intelligence. And that's where the difficulty comes.
Slalom talk about bring your own AI. Do you mind explaining what that concept is?
It means that organizations are experimenting and using AI in a completely uncoordinated way. Mm-hmm. So It could be individuals within an organization are taking advantage of AI applications to better do their jobs, to be able to do their jobs quicker or faster by enhancing document writing, by image generation through AI. Or it could be departments or business units in a particular organization that have harnessed a use case and are using AI to drive some kind of value, but it might not be in deference to a particular business objective at a strategic level.
According to Nash Squared's research, just 2 in 10 organisations have an AI policy. Do you think that lack of policy could lead to stagnation around innovation? And perhaps what might it mean for talent?
Our research that we did supports that as well, actually. An AI policy is absolutely needed to form the right structure and so that the organisation is investing across the board in the right things to achieve its business objectives. So you don't get that pockets of innovation not pulling in the right direction. So I would say that AI policy is needed for that structure. I don't think a lack of it is stagnating the organisation. In terms of the talent question, I do worry that if we don't allow an organisation to innovate and we put too much of a policy in place, then it will disempower the talent that we have. And what is talent? Talent is your people that are driven, they're motivated, they want to do better, they want to be better. The world is evolving and AI is only going to make that happen at a quicker speed, where you have a new evolution of jobs. You want your people within your organizations to have the skills to be able to do that, because without that, you're not just lacking innovation within your business, you're stopping the wider context and business arena from progressing within society.
Caroline makes the point that while certain sectors are pushing ahead with AI, many aren't. Nash Squared's research points to plenty of proof of concept projects, but little else. We're waiting to see what regulation comes down the pipeline, and no one wants to retrofit. That's a problem. It could lead to stagnation, and that could harm the future career prospects of professionals.
The young people and the students are interested naturally in these new things, like AI, like robotics, and so it's not a hard sell for us to recruit students. I think when you move to industry, it's a much different picture, because there is a tendency to be very conservative for legal reason and risk management reason. And so sometimes there's a disconnect between the expectation of the people you've trained and the reality of the work in the workplace. And there's very few companies, certainly in the UK, where you can find the type of jobs that are as stimulating as they expected, I think.
Surely if you are a technologist working for a company that doesn't have an AI policy, doesn't understand AI, puts you at a severe disadvantage in terms of career prospects.
It does. I think we also have to remember it's not just about technology. The types of technology and the way in which we develop and train that technology will probably change at such a rate that, yes, technical skills are super important. However, we can't forget the other skills that are going to be equally important to make sure that we can, as an organisation, but also as a society, harness the value of AI and make an impact through AI. Back to the question in terms of, is the technology putting their workers at a disadvantage? Yes, they probably are, but it's probably a much more multifaceted question. That they need to be equipping their organisation with not just the technology skills and facilitating their learning of AI, but it's also equipping with the softer skills that are going to be absolutely critical in making sure that we can advance with this.
Clearly, we need self-regulation where AI is concerned. But the problem is, over the last couple of decades, the technology industry hasn't exactly proven that capable of self-regulation. In November, the UK hosted the AI Safety Summit, and governments came together to work towards the safe development of the frontier of AI with a joint agreement. Look, it's great news that global governments are coming together and tentatively agreeing to collaborate. But optimism for success isn't exactly high. According to Nash Squared's Digital Leadership Report, 61% of leaders don't think regulation will work. They clearly need convincing. Ott Velsberg is the Estonian government's chief data officer.
I'm concerned whether we are doing enough to support the ecosystem itself, or it is really rather about regulation and putting up new requirements. Europe has set out that all member states, there should be a 75% adoption of AI in the private sector. Imagine 75%. In many countries, we have 90 plus, sometimes 99% of all companies are SMEs. So it's really up to the government to support via developing open source core tools, services that private sector can in the end implement, use, because it is impossible for that large scale development to be happening across all small and medium-sized companies. So we need to rethink what we are doing in Europe. And instead, we are focusing really strongly right now on the regulation.
Do technology leaders within the SMEs that we're talking about, within those organisations, understand the role that they have to play in achieving regulation that works for everyone?
Unfortunately, I think right now, due to the complexity and how things have worked, I think SMEs, if we talk in general, don't understand what is coming. And I think that's kind of a key part. It's similarly to GDPR. Everyone understood that something is going to happen. Everyone were a little bit cautious, but now with the AI, it's the similar. Companies are waiting from the government a clear message. This is what you need to do. Expecting everyone to understand the scope. Unfortunately, I don't see that this is the case. And it's at the same time true as well. If you have 5, 10 people in a company, SMEs, sometimes more, sometimes less, then thinking from an AI Act perspective, I think it's too much to ask.
As CEO of the National Robotarium, when you hear that technology leaders are sceptical about the potential success of AI regulation, do you think that's misplaced?
No, not entirely. I think regulation is one way of making sure that we get these things right. We've had a history over, particularly in recent decades, of introducing new technologies and trying to use different ways to make sure that we get the maximum benefit and the minimum harm. I think what we find is that regulation is one part of it, but it's not the only way that we make this happen. I think there's a responsibility on politicians, there's a responsibility on the product developers and the engineers, the tech leaders, but there's also a responsibility on the public at large to be aware of the technology and understand how it can be used and where any dangers might lie.
Throughout this debate, it's important we don't lose sight of one core question. What does this mean for us? Even today, some jobs are being put under pressure. Humans and robots are competing, and that's leading to mental health concerns.
We are struggling to find anybody to work in agriculture, to pick up fruits and vegetables, and we're struggling to get anybody to go offshore to do this work because it's hard environment. We're struggling to find people to go do construction work. So all those areas where you already have a shortage of staff, I can see robotics making inroads there first.
People are worried that automation might lead to a reduction in the amount of jobs available for people. What would you say to that? How do you think robotics can actually go hand in hand with workers, and how do you think that jobs might evolve in the future?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's one that we're faced with quite often, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And because people are really scared about robotics and AI replacing their jobs, especially within the healthcare industry. But I think people's perception of robotics are a lot more scarier and they're a lot more intimidating than what we actually know what robotics are capable of. Robotics in our field are never going to be capable of replacing the occupational therapist, the physiotherapist, the doctor. We are so far away from that. I can't even see that in these next 50 years.
What do you think the future impact of robotics and AI is likely to be on the workforce?
I think if we get it right and we concentrate on the right utilization, it's going to be really positive. It's going to allow us to move people out of jobs that they don't particularly want to be doing, those jobs that are repetitive, those jobs that are dangerous. It's going to allow us to then replace that with opportunities to work in more skilled jobs, more interesting jobs. But it's also going to allow us to create new jobs that don't exist right now, jobs that are associated with robotics, whether that's design and development, whether it's manufacturing or maintenance. So there's going to be quite a mix. I think if we look at technologies that have been introduced over many decades in the past, picking, for example, the introduction of aircraft, there wasn't an aircraft industry before aircrafts were invented and started to be adopted. That's had a positive impact in terms of creating jobs, opportunities for many, many decades, and will continue into the future. And I think robotics and AI will be very similar to that. But the other thing that aircraft did was it replaced other modes of transport. And so, ocean-going liners went out of business. But we'll see exactly the same thing with this. I think the positive thing is that as a civilization, mankind has always managed to evolve through these technology changes. This one, I think, is going to be very significant. But I think at the end of it, if we do it correctly, then we'll come out with a lot more benefits than problems.
AI could take away the need for us to do the jobs that we don't want to do. That change will be profound, as we've just heard, where it comes to industries like aviation and the impact it had on ocean-going liners. But throughout this film, we have heard concern where it comes to a lack of cohesion, and that could extinguish the opportunity for AI to be a change for good. Look, innovators are working hard to try and unlock the benefits of AI, but we have to be mindful that there are barriers to overcome, such as potential unhelpful regulation and a lack of money.
What would you like to see regulators do or the environment change in some way to try and make sure that you can thrive as a business?
I think regulations are great, and with regulation comes a lot of evidence that's required for us as a business to enter these markets, and that's great. That keeps everybody really safe. But what doesn't exist right now, even whenever that evidence is present, is the actual funding for robotic and new systems like ours to be piloted within these healthcare systems. So yeah, funding is a huge part of that, and we need there to be more to get our systems like ours piloted within the NHS.
We need to understand also that people need to have the basic data literacy, because the world is getting more and more data and AI kind of powered. So people need to have the basic understanding. What are their rights? How technology itself functions. So these are the key aspects that we need to start from elementary on.
We're on the edge. There's a disconnect between expectation and reality when it comes to the boardroom and the classroom. But education's critical in both, so that CEOs understand what's possible and employees can take advantage of the careers and drive innovation and growth. But we're putting talent at risk through ignorance, and we risk breaking our whole economic model in the process.
So at the moment, if you have a care worker in a care home, they go to work, they pay taxes. So some of the activities they do is going back to society. If you replace that by an army of robots, who's going to pay the taxes? Yeah? So you need to change fundamentally, I think, a little bit the way we work the economy if you replace worker by robots. And the workers will then do other things. So they'll have more time to do maybe more creative things, more artistic things, but they might be less productive. The productivity will increase for society, but individual productivity of individual might decrease. And you need to have a model that solves that. So I don't know if I've answered the question really well, but it's a complex problem.
Yeah.
I think in the short term, it's not a risk because we're going to create a new industry. So if you look at when people used to manufacture textile, and it was all handmade, and then you bring the machines, and all these people lost their job in 10 years. But they reinvented themselves, and they found new jobs, and you had created a new industry where you need to build a machine, you need to maintain them, you need to so all of that comes with it, and it's going to be the same with robotics. So if you have robots, who's going to maintain them, who's going to program them, who's going to look after them? Mm-hmm. You could argue other robots. Yeah. But I think we will see a change, and we need to manage that change. And what I'm worried about is that governments haven't really even started to think about it.
Inertia is a real problem. Government doesn't have all the answers, and conservative thinking is only going to blunt your competitive edge. We're left waiting for digital leaders to step up. Look, it's up to you to write the policy that creates structured environments in which talent can flourish, but you also don't strangle innovation. Too many aren't grasping this opportunity, and you're failing your people. Of course, there's one voice we're yet to hear from. Are there appropriate safeguards in place concerning robotics and AI?
There are ongoing efforts to develop appropriate safeguards and regulations regarding robotics and AI. It's important for governments and organizations to continue to work together to ensure that these technologies are developed and used in a safe and responsible manner.
I think the tipping point is that if we start to also trust what we are actually doing, so instead of having this kind of glasses on that AI is bad, which is right now kind of a really growing sentiment in terms of these are kind of a couple of major players, everyone else are lagging, we need to control, we need to regulate, but let's enable the ecosystem. Let's start to think how we can utilize AI to build a better future, how we can really build an AI virtual assistant for every citizen, how we can support medicine. Let's put in resources to actually change the way we are kind of operating on day-to-day basis. So this is a key aspect. And also we need to understand that with every AI, you need to have the home base kind of in order. So data governance, how we are handling data from the beginning. We cannot jump to AI if we have not even digitized how we are operating today. So kind of a robust data governance, that's a must. And if we have that in place, then we can start working on AI.
All right. Don't act shy. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Bev. Thank you, Harvey Nash and Nash Tech, for inviting us at NASA to be a part of this and engage in this very, very important dialogue here today. So I'm Crystal Johnson, Dr. Crystal Johnson. I am the Deputy Center Director for Technology and Research Investments at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. There, I'm responsible for shaping the missions of the future in astrophysics, earth science, heliophysics, and planetary science, and then making sure that we have a robust portfolio of technology investments so that we can actually enable those crazy mission concepts that we're coming up with for the future. And so for us at Goddard, AI is absolutely critical to the way that we're going to be doing missions of the future. We are the largest Earth Science Center for NASA. And so for us, This is very important. As you know, we do astrophysics, things like James Webb Space Telescope. I'm sure all of you have heard of that. Because of the budgets that it requires for missions that large, we are definitely not going to be able to afford to continue to just do flagship missions in the future. We, along with the whole community, are going to be going with more constellations. So distributed kinds of science measurements as opposed to one flagship mission. So we're talking about doing reconfigurable swarms. So you start looking at one particular scene, you have many instruments looking at that scene, you have another swarm someplace else. You can actually take some of that and move it over when you have another thing you want to observe and bring the right instruments over to take a look at that. And so for us, we're looking at it not just for our science missions, but we're considering even digital twins. So doing a digital twin of our entire campus at Goddard Space Flight Center, being able to tie together your whole entire infrastructure, and we've got a huge campus at Goddard Space Flight Center, tying your institutional infrastructure with the way that you're managing your people, the way that you're managing the missions, programmatic elements and all, tied together into a digital web and being able to take a look at that. And so I will say that for Goddard, I mean, Goddard has had a big interest in AI, but the agency has now also ramped things up to another level. The agency has hired a chief AI officer and chief data officer, and we have also hired a chief AI officer at Goddard, and that is Dr. Omar Hatamla here, that you heard mentioned. He is going to be moderating our panel here, but Dr. Hatamla has also been working with our agency because our agency has decided we're going to have a vision of 2040. What in the world is that? So by 2040, NASA is envisioning that we are going to have humans living sustainably on the moon 16 years from now, 2040. That means we've got to think about everything differently today, and I mean everything differently today, so that we can prepare ourselves today to be ready for the kinds of things we've got to do in 2040, including high-tech health devices and medical types of things, all of the robotics that you saw there, environment and natural resources, making sure that we have complete sustainable capability here so that we can be able to do that on other planetary bodies. We're already looking at doing recycling of everything. Right now for the International Space Station, we take urine, respiration, all of those things, and we recycle all of that for clean drinking water for the astronauts to be able to use that. So getting to a place where we are thinking about zero waste here on Earth and being able to pick that up and take it elsewhere is something we've got to get to. Digital twins, not just of facilities, but of human beings. Having a digital twin of each of you in here, so that when you have a medical situation, we actually can go to your specific genotype and be able to address specifically what's going on in your body. That's where we're getting in terms of AI and digital capability, not just the basic kind of robotics, because we're going to need a lot more. We're going to have to ramp everything up if we're talking about having humans living on other planetary bodies in 16 years. And so, with that said, it's really important for us. We're going to have a panel discussion now, but one of the most important things for us is that we are going to have a reception afterwards, and we really want the opportunity for us to be able to engage with each of you here in the audience. And so, Steve McLaren, could you stand up so that they will see who you are? All right, and so Steve actually flew all the way in from Scotland, from Edinburgh, just to be here to be able to engage. Robotarium is his gig. And so he'll be able to talk to you about some of the specific things that they're investing in and researching, and we're all looking for people that we can partner with. We've got Morgan Stanley here in the organization. Where are you from, Morgan Stanley? Over there, absolutely. We've got, of course, the LinkedIn people. We've got X-Foundry here from the University of Maryland. Could you raise your hands here? So many different varied groups of people, and we're talking about arts and entertainment even, because the journey from Earth to Mars is going to be 9 months long. How are we going to keep humans viable? Mental health is going to be very important. Arts and entertainment, how do we keep them engaged? We've got Gary Goldstein here with us in the audience today. Raise your hand so they can see who you are. He is a Hollywood producer of movies like Pretty Woman and Mothman Prophecies and things like that. And so we have a variety of people here that we love to be able to engage with all of you. And we've got some wonderful leaders from NASA in the audience. Krista Peters-Ledard, who is the head of our science organization. Dahlia Kirschbaum, who leads our earth science, and one of our heads of engineering right here. You stand up and let them see you, Bob Jameson. So thank you all very much. And we have Jay right here, Jay Falker, who is my deputy. So right now I am assigned to NASA headquarters. I'm leading the technology work stream for our agency as we think about what are we gonna do for 2040. But the other thing that the administrator's office has asked me to do is to stand up a new NASA front door. So we are looking for non-traditional partners to work with us as we think about the challenges that we've got to address today to get ready for 2040. And we are looking to partner with people who don't consider themselves to be space organizations. We need people who are not inside the box to look at our problems, look at our challenges and say, why are you doing it that way? Why don't you just consider this? And so we're looking for people that just have different kinds of ideas, which is why we're really excited to be able to have conversations with you all here today when we go out into the audience. So right now, I'd like to welcome Dr. Omar Hatamla so that you can introduce our wonderful panel, and thank you all so much for agreeing to come. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Amazing documentary, Dave. Thank you very much, Dave and Harvey Nash, for inviting us for this incredible opportunity to share with you some of the elements of artificial intelligence. So imagine the world as a grand chessboard, where every piece is a potential move in the hands of an unseen player, artificial intelligence. But unlike chess, in this game, the rules are still being written, and the stakes are humanity's future. So artificial intelligence is nothing new. You know, it's been in existence since 1956. What the step function that happened is with the emergence of large language models in November 2022. At that point, anybody that didn't have any technical knowledge was able to leverage on this incredible capacity of large language models and artificial intelligence to do amazing things they would have thought impossible just a decade ago. Of course, when these things came out, a lot of people were concerned, legitimately. You know, they were talking about, okay, what is the impact on my jobs? It's going to take my job. The government was saying, can we regulate these technologies? You know, people were concerned about the privacy, about impact on democracies. What is the impact on misinformation? Is going to be amplified even beyond what we have right now with social media. And the more we keep going into these kind of discussions, obviously these tools will continue to evolve, become more mature, much more advanced. But hopefully, collectively, we'll be able to manage and put a framework for regulation that makes sense completely. So we've had a lot of discussions comparing artificial intelligence to the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution came in, people were actually concerned that it was going to take a lot of the jobs, but eventually created an incredible amount of jobs. The challenge now, we're not only competing with manual labor, we're competing with intellect. And artificial intelligence is going to be able to impact jobs in medicine, in law, in finance, in engineering. There is not a single job that AI is not going to be impacting. And everything you're seeing right now is still at the baby stages. We haven't even reached the general artificial intelligence. We're supposed to be at the same levels as humans. And a lot of the experts anticipate we're going to reach that level by the end of this decade. And by the way, it's not going to be a binary decision. It's not going to be finally we've reached it. It's going to be a gray zone where a lot of the people and experts are going to say we have reached it. A lot of them are going to disagree. But eventually, the whole community will agree we have reached that incredible milestone that has incredible transformative effects on humanity. Perhaps one of the amazing fields with artificial intelligence is impacting is actually medicine. It's transforming the field of medicine in ways we haven't even seen. Every single week, there's an incredible advance with transformative effects on all of us. And just to give you an example that came last month. So, people with ALS, eventually, unfortunately, they start losing the way and the capacity to speak. And we saw, like Stephen Hawking eventually, was communicating with very primitive technology that we had at that time and having a robotic system talking to him. But recently, last month, we were able to implant a chip in somebody's brain that chip was able to read the mind of this person, read the thoughts. And not only read the thoughts and translate these thoughts into verbiage, into vocal system, but it was in his actual voice. So imagine now he's talking in his voice by a system reading his mind. Can you imagine all that stuff? We're still at the baby stages. Just imagine 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, the incredible potential and capability from that. You know, we've been using amazing robots in factories for a long time as well. I mean, they've done an amazing job, very repetitive, very reliable. But then we're going to have the AI-powered human robots, where we actually have dexterity beyond anything we've seen before, combined with artificial intelligence. So that's going to be able to have an incredible impact on the workforce on every single level. So now we're talking about intellectual jobs, and we're talking about manual labors and everything in between. So, but also we need to look into the fundamental laws that we have abided with. We always talk about Asimov laws, that a robot might not injure a human, a robot might not do that. But then think about it. If this robot becomes a surgeon, you have to put an incision on a person. That actually classifies as injuring a person. Imagine if this robot is in charge of security, and you know, to be able to save 10 or 50 people, he has to actually injure a person or two. Then that conflicts with these laws. So we need to reevaluate even the most fundamental laws that we always abided with. But also the impact on taxation and automation, like your documentary alluded to as well. So if the workers start being replaced with machines, 85% approximately of the revenues for the government in the US comes from individual tax returns. If that stuff gets translated into automation, then the whole economic systems need to be revisited, and we need to look at it in a whole different context. But also immigration, if you know, it kind of it's irrelevant. But a lot of the countries, especially in Europe, they depend on importing labor from different countries because their population is not growing at the stage or at the levels that they need to produce the economy. So they're importing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people from across the globe. So once we have these incredible intelligence systems, intelligence automated robot, then there is no point to importing immigration. So immigration will be impacted, and then the economic systems will be also impacted because a lot of these workers, the countries that they come from, they depend on their remittances, financial remittances, to be able to augment their economy system. How is that going to be impacted? I think to be interested. And perhaps one of the fields that actually not going to be displaced by the music, but by AI, is potentially going to be amplified is innovative, creative functions. Like, for example, in music, I see like a system being generated by continue humans to create amazing music. Then other musicians will leverage on the power of artificial intelligence to create even better music. And then there was a genre will be completely created with AI music. I created that whole album last week. It's incredible how easy it is. And it will be, I see it as, for example, you go to a store, you see a mug, ceramic mug, one made, mass-produced, but, there's human touch signatures or painted by human, and one artisan made completely with hand. All of them will find customers. Everyone will have a special, interest. But let me show you, this is a great example. So Beethoven, one of the most incredible, composers of our time, he died before finishing his 10th symphony. And all they had is actually few notes, few scratches, and nobody was able to reproduce it. They spent decades and decades trying to do it. Until, of course, AI came in, they were able to produce the actual symphony. And this is the actual symphony here by AI. Seems like science fiction, isn't it? And again, this is baby stages. Just wait until it becomes more advanced. But even, I'm going to end up this quick talk just talking about society in general. I remember when I grew up, we used to talk to people in person, our face-to-face interactions, that used to be the norm. And then we evolved to society phase 2, which is the young generations. They spend the majority of their time texting and engaging in social media. But at least it's talking, between people, but through electronic means. The next evolution will be people spending more time with artificial intelligence systems. Imagine a system that knows more about you than you know about yourself. It matches your personality. It has incredible knowledge about everything else. People will feel more comfortable sharing and embracing these systems as their friends. And then the last one is once we reach advanced humanoid robots, we'll become incredibly similar, and I would say in maybe 50, 60 years will be very difficult to distinguish between a human and a robot with these incredible advanced AI systems that have tectonic shift in what we are as society. The fabric of society will be 100% different than we see today. How it's going to look, you know, we need to work on it, on all these elements from today. So today we have an incredible, talented, esteemed panel. If you can join me to the stage here, please. And so we had a very diverse group. We're going to have people that are experts in climate change and regulations and the human elements of artificial intelligence. So you can see it's going to be a very broad discussion, very, you know, out of the box and engaged, and hopefully very thought-provoking discussions that all of you guys will enjoy. So maybe we can start with quick introductions, each one of you, so the audience can understand who they are and what your expertise.
Sure, yeah, so I'm Greg Alcesser. I work at the NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is part of Goddard Space Flight Center. We have a little lab that's down on the corner of Columbia's campus. If anyone was a Seinfeld fan, we're above that restaurant that you see in the old Seinfeld clips. It's pretty cool. So there we mostly work on, we do things with Earth science related. We develop a climate model. And so I'm a climate scientist. I work on that climate model. I also use a lot of the observations that NASA satellites collect as satellites orbit Earth. And we use those to inform our model development. And then we begun using artificial intelligence to improve the way we do climate modeling, both in terms of making it more efficient and improving some of the equations. So I'm not going to go into a particular equation. I won't scare you with that. But climate models have equations, and they are uncertain, and AI can help us make those better, and that's something we're also working on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg. Justine?
Omar, Justine Kashnitsa. I'm an attorney, so the least interesting person on the panel. But I left the East Coast to go to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to work with robotics 15 years ago as a technology lawyer. And over that time have worked in the space industry, have worked with a lot of the robotics type companies that are producing the robots that you see on the stage, AI technologies. Virtually all my clients are using AI right now, and so I regularly negotiate AI policies, draft them either on the vendor side or vendee side. And because of my clients have been needing to get up to speed and participate in the regulatory landscape as it comes to AI. So delighted to be here and talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Justine. Pilar?
So I'm Pilar Manchon. I'm delighted to be here too. I'm a Senior Director of Research Strategy and Engineering on Google Research. So you might have heard of Google. We do AI. And I've been working in AI before it was fashionable. So before we could do all these wonderful things, and we were struggling to make, you know, some of these wonderful ideas appear to be possible some 20 or 20-something. I'm aging myself now. That's horrible. You might notice an accent. I'm Spanish. So in addition to being part of Google, I'm also part of the Council of Experts advising the government of Spain in AI strategy, or at least trying to. So I do have a little bit of experience trying to see how regulation fits into the research that we're doing and the kind of impact that we're going to have in society.
Thank you very much, Pilar. I'll start with Greg with the question. You know, climate change has been classified as an existential risk to humanity. And the more we advance, the more we understand what are the tenets, the main factors that affect climate change more than others. And you guys have done an incredible job, including even artificial intelligence. But now in the near future, you're going to start having even more advanced tools like quantum. When quantum starts jumping into play here, once we start reaching much more maturity level of these algorithms, how do you anticipate that's going to have an impact in actually anticipating and potentially finding the factors that affect climate change more than others? Because we know in general some of these factors are affected, but I think that might potentially give you indications, okay, we should tackle prioritization list maybe. We should tackle this one or that one because they have the fastest impact in mitigating some of these impacts. So maybe you can share some of your insights on that topic.
Right, so as a scientist, we're generally aware of the various factors that affect climate change. Where we are limited, however, is being able to run all of our climate model experiments to verify that those are the dominant factors. So I think one way AI can really help us is to sort of come up with this, to help us come up with a surrogate model of a climate model where we can run this very quickly, okay, and we can perturb some of the internal equations in the model, and we can advance our computing and come up with all of the possibilities, sort of and test these various assumptions and various factors. Yeah. And to do that right now would just take years and years and years. But if you can leverage AI to sort of serve as a surrogate to replace or to make it a climate model run better or more efficiently, I think that is one way that we can really investigate or verify that we know some of these dominant factors and that we suspect are very important.
We're looking forward to see how that field is going to advance, because I think there's not a single human on Earth is not going to be impacted by this. So this is transversal, and it's very essential at the core of everybody. So thanks for doing this amazing job. That's impacting all of us.
And just one final thing, feedbacks are the biggest thing in climate system, right? So that's where we're really unknown. So this helps us tackle that, which is really our big unknowns. Yeah.
And let's move to Justine. Justine, there's a lot of people talk about regulation, putting a lot of guardrails, policies, and obviously this is essential because the potential negative challenges from artificial intelligence are much more amplified than other technologies. But at the same time, you need to have a balance, because if you put too much regulations, you're going to stifle the creativity, the innovation, the advancement of these technologies. And sometimes it seems like it's really hard to hit a balance in terms of what's good while you continue to advance, and also at the same time ensure we have the proper guardrails and everything else. From your personal experience, where do you think the balance fits?
That's a wonderful question, and that question of balance is critical to many technologies and new technologies that are emerging, particularly in AI, which, if you talk to the technologists themselves, they are still in development and unsure exactly what the inputs and outputs and processes that lead to the outputs are. A lot of, especially with generative AI now, when we were talking about extractive AI, it was different. We really had a sense of the AI systems were able to work through, machine learning and multiple data sets. Yeah. Now we're talking about layers of neural networks that are coming out with outputs that are just unknown. Yep. So it is very difficult. Law has always been a reactive practice, and I think that is the number one issue to think about. So when you're talking about policymakers and regulators, they have strong intent, right, to do something that is positive for society, and to look at technology and to come up with prescriptive policies and regulations that create those guardrails. But these are a lot of times people that are not trained as technologists. These are people who might dabble and understand to a certain level what technology is. So it's critical, number one, that any policy that is written with the input and in collaboration with the technologists that are developing these tools. That's number one. Yeah. Number two is, I would say, we need to recognize and be mindful and self-critical of the fact that our regulations are reactive and not prescriptive and visionary. So when we're drafting rules, that balance has to say, okay, how do we establish and enshrine guardrails and policies and constraints, which are critical for developers to work within, while at the same time not putting so many constraints as to stifle innovation, which you see a lot. I mean, I worked in the autonomous vehicle industry, right, in the robotics sector, and it's very interesting to see how that, by analogy, was an industry, the automotive industry, has been very much voluntary regulated by the industry, and was desperately asking for more guardrails in the development of it, right? Similar with AI, we just don't know quite yet where we're going. So I would just point to samples now that we have the EU AI Act that came out this year, which we're still looking to see how that's going to be implemented across the European states. But that's a classic example of, I would say, hyper-regulated AI act that's going to be a benchmark for what we see. And it's driven from the GDPR basis. So it's created as a complement to a data regulation that we have. You have California coming up with regulations that's sitting on the desk of the governor. Colorado enacted. The problem with the US is we are a body of states, so we're not going to have any kind of comprehensive AI regulation here. You're going to see a patchwork quilt of US states coming up with their own benchmark regulations, and many of them strike a tone that are drawing the ire of a lot of folks that are reviewing this for not hitting that balance right or being too prescriptive. Yeah. But time will tell. I mean, the EU Act is putting together legislative bodies that are evaluating how this will be implemented when it goes into effect in 2026. In the US, Colorado, we have a number of years before it goes into effect, before we are able to sort of make adjustments and changes. So it's not good to sit back and do nothing, right? AI is the principle of so many human-regulated initiatives, medicine, law, immigration. You mentioned a lot of them in your slides. We need to regulate, but how we approach it is a different matter. The US lens has always been much more policy-driven, so here are the guiding principles for how we think about AI development. There's an AI Bill of Rights that was put out by OSTP at the White House. There is an executive order on the guiding principles around AI development that we have, and those are good. That's a good, positive first step. Maybe doesn't go far enough, but at least it gives the developers a tool by which to do what I call sort of responsible AI by design at the point of development.
No, absolutely, and I'm sure these are starting from an excellent point, but we'll see that some of them are working, some of them are not. We'll get the feedback and we readjust eventually to targeting them a bit more than they're supposed to be. So Pilar, you're one of the world thought leaders on the impact of AI on the human element. You're talking about from a human perspective. So maybe I want to hear from your point of view, how do you see AI impacting the future jobs? And even before that, even education, because you need to have a solid education to be able to get people to the jobs. Maybe you can compare, contrast, and see how AI is completely transforming these fields.
I think that we have seen many of the examples that you have provided before, how AI is already changing the way we think, the way we see, the way we engage with one another, the way we engage with the arts and the sciences and music and everything. So it's affecting everything that we do. And when something affects everything that we do, I think that there is no option but to have some deep impact in who we are as individuals, as groups, as communities, and as society. And it's exciting. It's exciting because we're going to be able to do so many more things. We're going to be able to change everything that we want. We have, let's say, the key to building a new society, a new world, to change almost anything that we want, because AI gives us that power, right? However, on the other hand, we have the uncertainty of we don't know exactly where we're going. Well, we have a magnificent tool that can take us almost anywhere that we want to go, and yet we don't know exactly where we want to go. So I didn't say it before, but my background is in cognitive science and linguistics and the humanities. And it's about finding that balance in between the science behind everything that we're doing and who we want to be as a society. And it's the humanities that study the human being. They study our society, they study who we are, they study the essence of us. And we've been doing that for millennia. And we haven't come to a consensus, right? And now we have AI, and we have a tool that can help us get somewhere, but where is that, right? So it's a discussion, it's almost like a philosophical discussion that we need to have with ourselves as individuals in our communities and in our society, not only understanding how far AI can take us, but also the pros and the cons of introducing AI to the different aspects of our lives. And you introduced very interesting examples, like for instance, human relationships. For every example that you have where AI can cause harm, you have another counterexample where it can do something wonderful. Imagine a society where you can create AI friends or lovers. That creates a more individualistic society. I don't need to have friends. I don't need to go out. I don't need to go dating. Why would I? It's complex. I can get anything that I want, like in a menu, right? On the other hand, for people, there is an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah, that's true.
So why not have an AI that can help you feel better, that can help you grow, that can help you evolve, that can help you be a more productive part of society, a happier part of society? What is happiness in all this? I could be talking for hours, so I better shut up now.
No, I mean, that tells you the passion. And by the way, probably AI is one of the most polarizing topics ever. A lot of people have strong opinions about one way or the other. And none of them is wrong, none of them are right. I think is everybody just looking at it from their own perspective. And if you would like to see exactly what's happening, you have to talk to a whole bunch of people, and have an open mind. And that's how you start getting, different ways of thinking. I always think that we need to shift our thinking from linear to exponential. We evolved to be farmers, hunters. Our brains are wired in a linear fashion, and nothing is linear anymore. Everything is exponential. So we need to embrace a complete exponential way of thinking to be able to understand the incredible potentials and challenges and impacts all these technologies are.
We're not built that way, Omar. We're not built that way.
Yeah, hopefully one day we'll make some
There are certain,
progress.
I think, policies and sort of guiding principles that are so human
Yeah.
that underpin AI, because that really, it is trying to be intelligence, right?
Totally.
So when you're thinking about that, it's not really, people who say AI or no AI, it's not really the right question to ask. It's coming. And the question is, how do we build trust in these systems, right? To make sure that they're safe, that they're integrated, that they follow a do no harm, human benefit function.
Yeah.
And then how do we prepare for it? So to me, you can't talk about AI without a workforce development conversation, which is how do we prepare our humans for for my job, which will be replaced over time, one of the first jobs to be replaced with AI. But when it does, in my practice, my associates, I really have to think about how we're training law students and associates at law firms.
Yeah.
And to me, it's no different than another language that we teach. And we are failing at teaching them at law schools, but we need to teach them how do you effectively know what to input into an AI system to get the output that actually makes sense for whatever you're doing, whether you're writing a brief or drafting a document.
Absolutely.
So to me, education and the tools that we can give to people to work with AI is going to position us to be able to craft strong legislation, sound legislation that works, that allows humans to work alongside AI.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Another one also, in addition to policies and regulations, is bias and ethics. I mean, even these simple, I don't think AI is good or bad. It's just whatever data it trained on, it reflects on us. It's a more reflection on us than it is on artificial intelligence.
Or at least Reddit posts.
There you go. and I've done a bunch of studies. I went to, for example, one of these image generating systems, and I asked it almost 10 times to make sure I've got enough time, enough cases to say. And I asked it 10 times to draw a nurse, and I had the parameters, the lighting, and everything else, the fancy prompts that you put. 10 out of 10, it was a woman. And then I went to a CEO. 10 out of 10 was a man. And then I went to a maid, to a worker, it's stereotypical like you've never seen before. And again, so maybe in addition to all these kind of things, we need to pay attention to the data that we're teaching these algorithms. And we need to make sure we abide to the ethics, bias that we are as a society before we get into advanced phases of artificial intelligence.
When I negotiate AI policies and contracts and AI provisions in contracts, it's very interesting because when I represent the large companies, they impose AI requirements around bias. So you have to commit as a vendor to eliminating all bias from your AI tools if you're going to use them, to the point where you're sort of sitting there, if you're representing the vendor of the AI product, and saying, this doesn't make sense. And that's an illustration of over-regulating without understanding how these tools are used, because you're not going to expect a singular developer to eradicate all bias, because that's not how the system works. So again, it's the push and pull and the balancing act that I think you're...
Gotcha. Yep.
I think there is a nuance that's interesting to bring to the table, because even in the examples that you provided, as a researcher, I have to think about all these cases, right? I personally work on factuality and human value alignment. right? So when you think about, for instance, the bias embedded in the data, sometimes we call bias is because we don't like what the reality is. The reality is that the data is reflecting something that we are building, and then we want an answer of what should be rather than what it is. But when do you make that decision? Because when you ask for a CEO and you get a bunch of males, it's because the great majority of CEOs are male. So that's a reality. Now, we don't want that to be the answer as a stereotypical answer because it shouldn't be that way necessarily. But when do you apply this should be versus this is the reality that we're living through so that we don't hide it, right?
Totally. No, that's a great point, Pilar. Go ahead.
Say one more. So there's a component. This is a great discussion. There's a component of this relevant to climate science.
Yeah.
So for instance, we're tasked with making a global climate model, right, which works everywhere. But if we're trying to improve that model with new data, where do we get those data, right? And so we have to start paying attention. There are biases in where we collect data. And so if we're training new equations on data collected in certain communities, and then we put that information into our climate model, well, you can end up with a global bias, right?
Yeah.
So, and the fact is, so we have to think about, well, how are we overtraining to data collected in certain regions? Something between some atmospheric input, and an output might be something like a cloud. Cloud, not in the Google Cloud sense, but a cloud that we see those puffy things in the sky.
Oh, definitely.
The relationships we derive, that we want to put into our global model, we have to be cautious about where we're collecting those data.
Yeah.
And be fair about it, and have a more global perspective.
No,
especially
exactly.
as data increases with time, and all of the computing advancements are allowing data to be collected nonstop. But there's a bias of where it's collected. Yeah. It's not global.
No, definitely, and brings me to the point of actually having ecosystems, because there's synergy across what you're working on, and I think it's collectively where you'll be able to get advanced level to the level that you need it to be, whether you're talking about GPU companies, whether you're talking about algorithms. So there is a lot of potential partnerships you can engage with to amplify substantially where you're at. Yeah. And I look at it sometimes as the forest. People look at the forest as single trees, where in fact it's a single organism. Everything is connected with a web of fungus underneath it, where they exchange nutrition, they repel insects together. So the same thing could be applied to the ecosystem of engaging partners to be able to create something that potentially. So are you guys engaged in a lot of these out of the box, out of the fence, basically, engaging partners to be able to complement challenges that you have to take it to a next level?
Yeah, I think that's
for that question, but I just want to let the audience know if we are going to be taking some questions from you all to address this panel. So if you could just start kind of walking down to the microphones there, then Omar will call on you to ask some questions.
Yep, sounds good. All right. So since we're running out of time, maybe I can ask each one of you to say, what is your opinion? What do you see as the biggest challenges, as the biggest opportunities with artificial intelligence? Not now, but in the next 5 years. Let's start with Pilar and move here to Greg.
For me, the most exciting thing by far is not only how AI is evolving, but what is empowering. It's like we are creating tools that are empowering pretty much every field of science and knowledge to evolve at an exponential rate. So we're going to go through a new renaissance. We're going to go through a new chapter where we're going to see breakthroughs coming in every field of science and knowledge, and that is exciting. Who cannot be excited by that? In terms of challenging, I think that the most challenging part is the human value alignment. It is about embedding our values in these models so that we are sure that when we get information, when we interact with them, and when we get responses and tasks are done and decisions are made, they're made according to our values, and those are transparent, controllable, and auditable.
Yep. Thank you very much, Pilar. Christine?
Very briefly, I think AI opens a beautiful future if we allow it to, and allow it to flourish in a positive way. Yep. The challenges to do that are obviously many: regulations, trust of the community in the systems, the workforce component, and the challenges that we'll face. But I do love that we're sort of looking at this through the lens of space, because space has been a discipline that is, from its inception, from the Outer Space Treaty, an international collaboration, and AI should be very similar. So we should be looking at this as an international collaboration of humans talking about, how do we even define AI? Every one of these regulations that we look at have a different definition. So coming together as a community of humans is what excites me, but is also going to represent a challenge.
Absolutely. Greg?
The notion of creativity. So I know there are a number of scientists in this room, and we get very excited when we come up with a new equation, something that reveals something fundamental about the Earth climate system. I think there's some question on, are we basically engineering that away? We're getting the right connections between inputs and outputs. We're losing the beauty of it. We're losing the understanding. We know it works, but why? And that's not satisfying for a scientist. So keeping scientists engaged, I think, will be a challenge, because creativity, we often think scientists of sort of like, plugging in existing equations, but part of science is coming up with something new. So can AI come up with something new? No. AI is trained on data. Yep. If we're in a different, think of the Earth in 100 years, different greenhouse gases and other forcings. If we train AI on the present, can it simulate the future to a high enough extent?
That's a good point.
Right, so keeping scientists engaged in creative aspects.
Definitely. Talking about the future, I don't think there is a single future. I think there's multiple futures. And which future we end up embracing will depend on each and every one of us. Our collective intellect, how we move together as a group, I think that will determine which future. And we hope it will be the best future for all of us. So with that, we'll move to the lady for the question.
Thank you. And wonderful panel.
Yeah.
Hi. So just listening to all of you, it's wonderful to get all of these perspectives simultaneously. And I feel like when we talk about the technology itself, regardless of how you want to define AI, deep learning, neural networks, et cetera, ultimately, I think this idea of having a global conversation is really fundamental. And we started this today. Documentary is part of that. But ultimately, there seems to be very different perspectives on who we are, right? There's the American perspective and American legalities, which is, from what I understand, at least I'm far from being a lawyer, but based on property rights. And then there's we in Europe, for example. You mentioned the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is focused much more on human rights, from what I understand, which is fairly limited. And we've talked about bias, but we haven't necessarily talked about, again, who these communities are that are being impacted. So I agree it's important to have experts, but what about the actual communities that are affected by the various technologies that we're talking about per use case? Because as much as lawyers are great at kind of figuring out what's going to come down the pipeline, how do we deal with it, how do we make money from it, there's also the perspective of the engineers, which is how do we code the business ethics. But then there's the perspective of the people and social justice, and how is this going to affect me, right, and my family and the people that I love. And ultimately, I'm just very curious, how do we figure out who we are in this global conversation about our future and our future technologies?
Yep, no, that's an excellent point. And even if you look at the basic premise of large language models, for the most point, they're trained on Western-leaning, ideologies and systems, technologies, might not necessarily reflect, for example, the Asian side of you, or the Middle Eastern side of you, or the South American point of view. So, and eventually, maybe we'll have more of these systems that will reflect the cultural components and cultural elements of these regions and everything else to be able to have some discussions there. What do you guys think?
I would advise you to look at some very interesting report called the Edelman Trust Report. I don't know whether many of you might have heard of it. And then you see whether people trust AI, who they think they can trust, whether the government, the media, the business, the scientists, and so on, and how that changes per different countries. And it's a really interesting perspective. In Google, we did some research with the Ipsos Institute, and turns out that people in the developing countries are the ones that expect the most positive impact from AI. People in the US are the ones that expect the least. So, it's counterintuitive, so it's super interesting. I could totally recommend you looking into these reports.
Okay, we have somebody from this side.
Thank you so much for all the insights. My name is Mona. A question around, so with Industrial Revolution, we now have climate crisis. We have made a lot of progress, but there's climate crisis. With Internet and Digital Revolution, we have mental health crisis. We have so many challenges like social media and there are so many things. Like it's in itself, it's a pandemic that is causing not just adults, but even young children. We're talking about 2 years old, 3 years old. How confident we are that we can handle another revolution like AI, given we haven't yet solved climate crisis or mental health issues. And globally, we are not even in consensus of those are issues. There are parties who would say no, climate crisis does not exist. So how do we know that we can handle another AI revolution and don't cause an existential crisis for the planet and the humanity overall? I know we are talking about going to moon, but what we have in front of us, we have no idea how to solve those original problems that we are facing right now.
Yeah, that's tough. So, not to mention, with the increase with increasing computing, there's probably an associated carbon footprint with that, right? That would exacerbate the
research the topic for 6 months.
Yeah. So I have not wrestled my head around that, but I've been thinking about it a lot, and I don't have a good answer.
I think we have to drill down to, I think, your comment about the values that we hold as community members, whether it's an individual rights approach, what do we hold dear, and reverse engineer our approach to some of these technological advancements from that perspective. Because if we have, the worst thing that we can do is, as a community, a body, not have a North Star that orients our development of these technologies. I think what we're seeing now is a risk-based approach. So you're looking at the moral hazards associated with the development of these technologies, starting with unacceptable categories of risk to acceptable categories of risk as you're developing this. And all of the unacceptable kind of categories hit on deprivations of individual rights and liberties. But again, it's a very Western-based approach. But nonetheless, that is where we are today. Is it good enough? I don't know. I mean, are we ready for AI revolution, as you said it? I don't know. We're still getting over our last revolutions, right? But I think that's one way to look at it that's more productive, as opposed to just saying, let's put a hiatus on all, there is no such thing as responsible AI. Let's put a hiatus on the development of it, given all the benefits that we can enjoy as a result of it.
I would put a positive note on it. I think that when you're in a position where we're moving forward, whether we like it or not, we got to this point and there is no stopping AI. So we better survive this, right? Okay. And I personally think that we have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the experience, now we know better. 15 years ago, social media, which created a crisis because we didn't do the research, because we hid the research, because I don't know what happened there. But now we know that it had an impact on the attention span of a whole generation. And that's an evolutionary level event for humanity. Now we know better. I like to think that we know better. And there are people doing research, wonderful people, some of them here, who understand the kind of impact that this can have. We're going in that direction. We have the tools, we have the data, we have the will, we have the need to survive. I think we're going to make it.
Thank you.
We need the moral authority to be able to come up with kill switches along the way, without question, I think.
Yeah. All right, we are going to just take one last question because the food is out there waiting for you all, and we want to continue the conversation outside while we eat and mingle. So one last question, and then we're going to head out and grab some of that food and continue to talk. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Mahesh. Thanks for the great event. I have a question for the attorney. In the driverless car space, one of the problems that used to be there was how to apportion the insurance, because the operating system is, centralized. The vehicle is not being driven by the driver anymore. So who will bear the liability, What's the state of the art in that? Thanks.
Insurance, that is a fantastic question. And actually, we don't have actuarial models because much of insurance is built on actuarial models. But I'll give you the example from healthcare. When one of the key tenets of the Affordable Care Act, right, was to eradicate sort of pre-existing conditions as a tool for insurance. If you take something like AI and embed it into sort of decision-making around risk for humans, like health risks, like safety risks, you might have vastly different answers that are going to cause significant challenges and problems because they evaluate the fact of life as it is. And so I think before we apply these models to insurance or risk-based impacts for actual individuals, we need to be very clear about whether that rises to the level of unacceptable risk that we cannot possibly entertain. Employment decisions, educational opportunities, right? The opportunistic things that we as humans avail ourselves of, healthcare, medicine, all of that. If that starts being determined by an AI system, we need to be policing that very carefully because you have communities at impact, individual rights at impact, some of the fundamental principles that we've worked so hard to defend and protect as humans are going to be upended.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us and flying from all over the country. And the organizers graciously have planned a reception downstairs on the first floor, so you could join us there. And also they ask us to please, before you leave the badges so it can be recycled as well. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for your attention. Looking forward to future engagement.
Go out one of these doors down here at the bottom so you can join the reception.